Yeah, so thank you everyone so much for coming. This was absolutely fantastic. I thought everyone's talks were awesome. I'm typically very bored at most conferences, but this was awesome. It was great. But thank you everyone for coming out, and it was great to hear from just a different variety of use cases. And as I was saying in the opening, to see everyone here and super excited, and just to see what everyone is building in such a short period of time. Only 2 years of open source has been super fantastic. So what I think we're gonna do just for this short closing session, because I know that people are eager to go out and mingle, is we'll do just a little quick rundown of some of the bigger roadmap items that we know that people are gonna be working on in 2019. I'm gonna introduce all of the maintainers who are here. I'm going to ask them to come up here so that people can see them, and hopefully when we're all outside, I'd like everyone to feel free to go and talk to all of the maintainers and chat with them. And then I have some Q&A icebreaker type questions, and I'm hoping that we can just send the mic around, and if people have any questions that they want to ask in the open setting, we can do that. So from a roadmap perspective, I think there's a couple of main things that we know that people are going to work on in 2019. As was already talked about before, there's a bunch of ongoing scalability work. So that's not only robustness protection, but also decreased memory usage, decreased CPU usage. There's already been quite a lot of optimization done, but there's definitely more that we can do. So I would expect in 2019, particularly as more and more people run Envoy as a directly internet connected proxy, we're gonna see more robustness, security, fuzzing, scalability stuff, which is all fantastic. Another big area for 2019, which I'm super excited about, is QUIC, or HTTP3. And so that is a very complex effort that's going to be I think our first large feature that will be a multi-company effort, which is pretty neat. Historically with Envoy, it's, we've had obviously lots of companies do really big features, but they've typically been done by one person or by one company. And this is the first feature that I know of where I know we're gonna have folks from Lyft and folks from Google and folks from Apple and folks from Uber who are all excited to help out. This is a huge feature, so it'll be great to get a group of people together to work on that. For those of you that don't know, QUIC is a next generation protocol that will hopefully give better networking performance in lossy networking conditions. There's plans around Kafka, so I think this is a very highly requested feature. So we actually have some work that's already been started here. The goal here is going to be to start with a basic observability filter, much like we have for MongoDB, and then hopefully actually move into more active L7 proxying and load balancing, which I think could be pretty amazing. VMware has started a major effort around MySQL, so there's code that's about to be merged there, and I think they have some pretty large plans in this area, which is great. Next thing that I'm really excited about is what we've been calling the tap dump support. You can think of this as like TCP dump at L7 in Envoy. I think there are some pretty incredible things that we can build here, both from a CLI tooling perspective, but also from an API perspective. So think of an XDS API that can not only send tapping configurations to Envoy, but then actually get tapped data back from Envoy over an API. And you can imagine how this might be built. You could do DDoS detection tooling where we're automatically sampling requests, building profiles, then actually sending blocking rules back to Envoy. So there are some pretty awesome things that we can do there, both from security, debugging. I'm pretty excited about this. Another one is generic outbound proxy. This has been one of the most highly requested Envoy features, so allowing Envoy to be used to talk to a whole variety of different domains and have that work in a scalable way. Another thing that I'm gonna personally plug is, and I'll have more to say about this probably in the spring, but at Lyft we're gonna be kicking off a major effort around running Envoy on mobile clients. So that's actually having Envoy run on Android and iOS. Again, I'll have more to talk about probably in the February or March timeframe. I think there's an incredible untapped opportunity for bringing Envoy out to the edge. So that's phones, IoT devices, etc. If that interests you, please come and talk to me. This is going to be a major open source effort that we'll be doing with all of you. And like I've said before, since we are not a paid product, we don't have an official roadmap. So what often happens is we are community driven. So what all of you either ask to build or want to build, I think that's what will end up getting built. So I think it always interests me because people are always saying, hey, we need a roadmap. Like, where's your roadmap? And sure, there's some big things that we know that we're going to end up working on, but ultimately the roadmap is built by all of you. So, I would continue to encourage you to send us emails and open issues and talk to us in Slack and, talk here and tell us what you're looking for. So people are, also often asking, like, how can people help? And, it doesn't always have to be code changes. C++ is not what many people want to be working on, and that's fine. As it turns out, there's lots of non-coding things that need to be done that are hugely, hugely important, and if anything, are more important than actual code changes. So those are things like documentation. We're always looking for people to help make our documentation better. That's not only fixes to the reference documentation, it's to make FAQ entries better or to have examples. It's as small as if you read the documentation and you were confused, please do a PR and help the next person not be confused by the same thing that you were confused by. That's hugely impactful, and it's just a great thing to do. Would love blogs. We're happy to post them on the Envoy proxy blog or to cross-link to your company's blog. But blogging is a great way to get the word out and to help the larger community. As I was saying before, to go along with documentation, there's examples. That's always great. And just open issues. We're very active in GitHub, so please email our user lists or our dev lists or open issues or talk to us on Slack. Love to talk to different people. And we are always looking for new maintainers. The rate of incoming code changes that we have continues to go up. I think now we're typically have 30 or 40 or 50 PRs open at once, and we're merging 10 or 15 changes a day. We have people that work on it full time, but we need more people. So if your organization supports you being a maintainer and you're interested, would love to chat with you to see if that's a possibility. So that brings us to our maintainers. For those of you that don't know, from a governance perspective, we have a dual maintainer status. It's kind of loose, but we have what are known as senior maintainers, and then we have regular maintainers. So currently we have 5 senior maintainers, and if people could just come on up, that would be great. Obviously, we have myself from Lyft, Alyssa from Google, who you heard from before. We have Harvey from Google. We have Stefan, who's not present today. And we have Greg from Apple. And then additional maintainers, we have D from Touch. I haven't seen him today. Is he here? Oh, there you are. Okay, great. Lizan, also from TouchRate. We have Joshua from Google, Dan from Google, Constance from Lyft, Daniel from Lyft, and Jose from Lyft. So big round of applause for everyone who's doing all this awesome work. You guys can just, yeah. Yeah, so we don't have to stand here forever. If there's no questions, we can go outside. But I thought it would be fun just to do a general Q&A, and I can bring this around, and we have the mic that can be passed around. But just a couple of different things. You're welcome to ask whatever questions you want of all of us. But just some general questions are there things that the project can be doing today to help you to succeed that we're not, right? I mean, that would be great to talk about. Are there particular high-level missing features that would help you, but that we don't have currently? And really, anything else. So I think what we can do is we have this thing, so I'll leave this up here, and then since it's being recorded, we can pass this mic around, but would just like to open it up for questions. So does anyone want to start? I guess maybe it would be easier if I just repeated the question, so go ahead. So the question, I think, is if we move to user mode networking, we've done a bunch of hardening around security. How does that hardening apply to all of the user mode code? Is that accurate? Would anyone like to take that?
So I can say essentially, having done a lot of the hardening work on Envoy, we've had this problem already in Google when we switched to Quick. Right, so Google tends to use Quick, our TCP replacement, for a majority of our traffic, or rather roughly a third, depending on where it's ported. And we've been able to do the same hardening for kind of this in user space UDP, so I assume that would translate fairly well to user space TCP.
The question is, Envoy has prom support built in, but we don't have histogram output today. I can just answer that super quick. It's not through not wanting it, it's just that no one has come forward to actually do that work. I don't actually think it's very difficult. So one of you maybe, just needs to finish it. It's honestly probably a couple days of work. We just need, I think none of the existing organizations use it, so no one has done it.
Do you consider Istio a complementary project, or do you plan on incorporating its features to reach parity?
Sure. The question is Istio complementary, or do we plan on bringing it internal? Would anyone like to take that one? No?
Yes, it's complementary. I don't have that much else to say, but yeah, I think that Envoy is kind of part of the Istio solution, and it offers a bunch of things that Envoy doesn't, and vice versa. So.
I mean, I would add to that over time there has been an upstreaming of some of the filters that have existed in the Istio repository to the main Envoy repository, and that's been beneficial because these are more general than just being Istio specific, and parts of Mixter have moved in and then that kind of thing. I don't know, like Lisa, do you want to talk a bit about this? You're our resident Istio expert.
Well.
Yeah, you just talk.
Okay. So yes, I think we contributed a lot from Istio perspective, Envoy side. We bring a lot of feature, and Istio serves the control plane, uses the Envoy as a data plane. So that will continue. Yeah.
Did anyone else have? Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I would add there is I think to your point, like there's one direction in which we could make a control plane that is part of Envoy proper. I think it's unlikely that we'll do that because it's a decision that we've made to clearly separate the data plane from the control plane and to allow, like I was saying in the intro talk, to allow lots of different projects to be successful and to differentiate on top. And I think that's one of the things that's made Envoy so popular is that we don't stipulate that people have to do it in a particular way. So I think we're really committed to making sure that we have a stable API that works for Istio or for other control planes, but I don't know that we would want to compete or subsume with Istio. Does that answer your question? The question is, right now, Go control plane is a stub implementation. Are there plans around that? And will it continue to be maintained? Would anyone like to take that?
So as you saw today, control plane servers have basically what I think 3 parts. There's a data munging part that actually does the transformations that transform your company's topology into the Envoy API. Then there's a caching layer, and then there's a server layer. I think the Go control plane and similarly the Java control plane projects try to abstract the parts that can be shared between different control plane solutions, being the server and the cache. And on top of that, you can build the control plane that your organization needs, or if you're a cloud provider or an infrastructure provider, you can provide something that can be used by different organizations. In terms of continued maintainership, as you saw today, and for example, at least from Lyft's perspective, we use Go control plane, so we have vested interest in continue to maintain that project. I don't know if you wanted to add.
No, I mean, I think there is definitely like shared fate with both Go control plane and Java control plane with many other projects, including Istio and various other companies. So I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that I would add too, just about control planes in general, and it's related to the last question, is I think a couple of years ago, particularly when Istio started and Envoy started, there's a dream that there'll be one control plane, right? And that's a great dream. Don't get me wrong, like that would be fantastic if that happens. But the honest reality, at least from my perspective, is that as we get closer to the user, as we get closer to the PaaS or the CaaS or the FaaS or whatever people end up using, it gets more and more opinionated, and it's more difficult to have one control plane that rules them all that isn't super confusing. I think like as we can abstract common functionality into the base Envoy project, whether that be control plane stubs or features or APIs, like we'll obviously do that. But I don't know that right now it's in the project's best interest to try to build a control plane that would end up just competing with a bunch of other control planes and probably not satisfy their concerns or not satisfy everyone's concerns.
I was putting one additional plug while we're on this topic, actually talking about the 2019 roadmap, and that is for incremental and on-demand XDS, which is the sort of the next generation of the XDS APIs. It's largely probably not going to be a hugely breaking change, but the idea is to make Envoy more scalable on its control plane and to allow resources to be lazily fetched and so on. And there's a bunch of work going on right now by various Googlers and folks from Red Hat, some of who are here today. And I think a lot of that's going to start landing in Q1. So that should be pretty interesting. And that will probably arrive in Go control plane as that work continues.
And just quickly, similar to Matt's plug for continued community efforts and maintainership for the main Envoy proxy project. Same goes for the control plane solution. So if there's any missing features or bugs or something that you'd want to see, same rules apply. We'd love the community to get involved.
I started thinking about this when the last question was asked, and now I'm still thinking about it. Is that the biggest thing that I've taken away from today is that I have learned more about different ways that people are configuring Envoy than anything else, and many of them are ways that I never imagined a control plane would exactly look like. So I think it's probably no surprise, given that we're at EnvoyCon, that the common factor is Envoy, and it's really the one data plane, and there's lots of different ways to control it rather than sort of what you were thinking of originally.
Okay, you're putting me on the spot here. The general plan right now, and like I said, is that we'll have a bunch more information hopefully in the March-ish timeframe. But the goal is we're gonna run Envoy on, like I said, both Android and iOS. So iOS will be Swift. Android, I think, will end up being Kotlin. And this is going to be an integrated solution where we'll run Envoy as part of a higher layer library, which will open source. And there's going to be deep protobuf integration around certain common features around API annotations. And we think that we can do some very interesting things at the API layer. So it'll be both about low layer networking, so around commonalities like TLS 1.3, quick, like a load balancing, mobile XDS. But at the API layer, we can do some very interesting things around annotations, around things like caching and offline APIs and deferred APIs and a bunch of other stuff. And we can implement all of that logic in Envoy and have that be similar across all platforms. So basically bring at least some of the goals of the out-of-process architecture to the mobile clients or to the edge clients. So from scale, I mean, we're talking millions of devices. Oh, sorry, you're talking like code size? Yeah, that's a tougher one. I think that there are going to be efforts in the Envoy layer to continue to strip code out that we don't need. So we may see more changes next year around further build flags, moving more code into extensions, which I know that the Google folks would love anyway because it's less code that needs to be security vetted. So I mean, there's probably wins from some of this work in a bunch of different avenues. The question is, what is the plan around MySQL and Kafka? I think that's ongoing. I can't speak for MySQL because that's being driven by VMware. Is anyone here from VMware who can speak? Can you come up? No, come up. Come on. You can. I'll talk about Kafka while you walk up here. Sure, and we'll talk about MySQL. But in terms of Kafka, I think it's less clear right now. I think even the folks at Confluent are pretty excited about a bunch of the stuff that we can do at the proxy layer. Honestly, I think it's a problem of having too many things that we can do with this and having to scope it down. So I think we're going to start with just metrics, and then we'll see where we can go from there. But there's so many things in terms of converting like HTTP traffic to Kafka or back and forth or load balancing. There's all kinds of stuff. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell everyone about MySQL?
Hi, my name is Sriram. I work on the Istio project. And so the plan for MySQL is we plan to turn that into a generic SQL parser library that will end up in Envoy core. such that we can actually develop wire protocols for MySQL, Postgres, and whatever else that's possible. And today, the SQL parser is actually going to give you information in terms of the tables accessed and the rows and what kind of tables are actually accessed in a given query, what was written and what was read from. Plus, you can do some RBAC stuff on those things in terms of saying you're not allowed to access this table or you're not allowed to write to this table and so on. And over time, we plan to just enhance this such that you can actually do more intelligent sharding, like reads go to some replicas while writes go to something else. And so yeah, you can do a whole bunch of things in terms of once you can distinguish between reads and writes in a given query and intelligent to split the queries and so on. But yeah, so that's the plan.
Any other questions?
Where do you see the end game with the adding features? So are we going to have a protocol filter thing for every protocol? Is Envoy going to do everything eventually? Where is the limit?
The question is where do we end? Like when do we stop making extensions? Does anyone want to start?
So I think there's a couple of things there. So there's a number of efforts to try and move things out of Envoy and make things more extensible. So there's this idea that we would one day essentially have a side call a gRPC filter where you can essentially move anything that would be in Envoy off to a generic gRPC service, and already lots of filters sort of work that way or have that feature, but this would be the sort of generalization of that. And the second thing is this increased move towards dynamic language support, which is loadable, over LDS, such as Luajit, or I assume that's the way the JavaScript extension works, and certainly WebAssembler is something that's coming up and that we have an open issue to track. And I think, eventually we'll be able to, you won't actually need to necessarily have these things built into the Envoy binary. You'll just be able to deliver these things dynamically. And yes, maybe the Envoy ecosystem will grow support for every protocol that ever exists, or at least, you'll be able to reuse existing codecs in other languages and easily map them to Envoy.
Yeah, just a little further thought here. I think we basically haven't gotten to the point where we have to worry about that, because so far everything that's been suggested over the last year or two and that I see upcoming is something that dozens of companies are really excited to have in Envoy. But just to add kind of one more note of where does it end? I remember about 10 years ago when I was working on the transition from our proxy to a V1 to a V2, my tech lead was completely convinced in 2 years we would spin down into maintenance mode. And 11 years later, we're now migrate our team is a 40-person team. We're still finding ways to make proxying faster. We did H2, we did Quick, and I feel like there's always going to be new and interesting ways to make proxying faster and better and add extensions and add new options. So I don't know that it is going to end, but we'll certainly make it easier to compile out all the stuff that you don't want, so that if you want a lean, mean proxy machine, you have it. If you want the kitchen sink, you can have that too.
Yeah. Echoing that, looking at other proxies or other server architectures that exist, the Apache HBD has been around for decades. Its core is incredibly stable and slow moving, but people make extensions to it all the time and still do. And I think if we move into that kind of ecosystem where there's a really robust, at some point maybe we'll have an ABI, but probably we're not ready for that yet. But I mean, I think that's the time when the ability to add extensions to it that might be only interesting to a subset of people might really expand and make it easier, and I don't think it'll stop.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as was said, there's things that we know that we need to do that are going to make this better. So moving last year to the extension model has worked out very well. So we'll continue to add hook points and continue to evolve to a core and extensions model. We will likely eventually support loadable modules. It wouldn't actually be that hard. Again, just someone needs to do the work. And then, as was just said, I mean, we know that we need to move to a a more stable API so that we guarantee that we won't break extensions. We have not done that yet because we don't want to decrease velocity, but we're probably reaching the point soon in which we're going to have to do that. So that might be a 2019 thing. It's unclear. Sorry, let me say. Sorry, so I just want to make sure I understand the question. Is the question, do we think that Envoy will just become the de facto thing and then there'll be a control plane, or that they'll will continue to have this general API? Is that the question? Got it. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Does it?
So I think the vision has always been with the XDS APIs, and Matt has this fantastic blog post about it, is that they will be the universal data plane APIs. The idea here is it really doesn't matter what control plane or data plane component you have, whether it's, for example, Envoy or Nginx or HA proxy or some maybe hardware load balancer. They will all eventually, hopefully, speak XDS. That's the vision. And in particular, as we grow the rich ecosystem of control planes, it kind of makes sense that many of these other data plane components start to adopt XDS. Like today, and this is already happening with the V1 XDS APIs, it was the shortest path for many other vendors of network proxies, such as Nginx, to get compatibility with Istio to just implement the V1 XDS API as an adapter. And this, I think, is probably likely to continue. Do you have anything you want to?
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's happening right now. If you see, I think Alipay has this SOFA mesh. It has a data plane in Go. It's can implement XDS API. You can see that. I mean, I think it's happening. I mean, everyone will just try to comply with the XDS specification.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously trying to build the APIs in a way such that that can happen. To be honest, from a practical perspective, once the data plane reaches a certain number of physical users, it becomes frankly a larger sell, I think, for someone to swap in some other proxy. Because sure, you can implement the API, but I mean, as we all know, APIs have a lot of intention in them that might not be clearly specified, and someone can implement XDS. It's going to take them a long time to make it work like Envoy actually does, let's be honest. And then is that effort worth it? So I have lots of personal opinions on this. That would be more of an out there conversation.
Yeah, actually, in line with that, I can speak to that a bit because we spent a lot of time in Google kind of debating about whether or not we wanted to implement something common that worked with Envoy and then try to be bug for bug and feature for feature compatible. And as you see, we decided what we wanted to do. We invested in Envoy because it's just really hard to keep up with any proxy that has the sort of community that Envoy does, right? And then as we add quick integration and as we add MySQL and as we add all these extra functionalities, you may support the XDS API, but actually trying to be feature compatible and bug compatible is going to be really tough. But again, for simpler use cases where people just want to proxy their data and do load balancing, totally fine if they swap out. I don't think any of us particularly have a stake in that game. Whatever works for people.
Good. Sure. Yeah, so the question is, as we add more and more features, we are shipping basically this Docker container today, which is like the super fat image. Will we ever do streamline things? I'll let other people weigh in. I think the answer is definitely yes. I think we already have a problem in which we may not be setting up things with exactly the defaults that people expect. I think Harvey messaged me about this today. The problem is that, as we were just saying before, it's impossible to make everyone happy. So then it's like, where do you end? I mean, it's like we do the light image, but then someone wants the light image plus X, and then now we have like 17 images with different settings. So I guess my answer, and I would like everyone else to weigh in, is I do think that we are going to have to revisit what is in the stock image and maybe what some of the defaults are. Personally, I don't want to end up offering, like the 70 Windows versions. No offense, but I don't want to have like Envoy Enterprise N or something like that, or because that's just not, it's not super sustainable. So we'll have to find some happy middle ground. Does anyone have any?
Yeah, I definitely think it'll be interesting to revisit, and just like listening to some of the talks today, the default configuration settings for various things, whether they're circuit breakers or statistics and so on. I mean, ideally, we have defaults which are both safe, but also make sense if you're doing performance benchmarking. I've sort of been in a number of conversations with folks who've done performance benchmarking, and they go, well, Envoy's not really good. It doesn't really compare to this other proxy. And I go, well, did you try changing this feature or that feature and turning this flag on? And the set of best practices for performance benchmarking, for example, and as a consequence, using it in a high performance production scenario are not obvious. And I think we definitely should try to do a better job, whether it's by documenting best practices or just flipping these on as defaults where they're safe to do so.
Yeah, echoing that, I also wanted to point out that if the goal, and I think it's a goal that I'm really aligned with, is getting a handle on understanding performance and scalability, et cetera. The essential piece that's missing there is not necessarily more prepackaged things, although that probably helps. It's a good set of metrics that are really easy to reproduce that tell you what performance you're getting with a certain configuration. And that's something that we're working for and hope to deliver something this year.
And I think echoing that, in general, where the maintainers can help and the community can help is actually enabling you to do what you need to do for your particular flavor of Envoy. So similar to an earlier talk today, where we were talking about how can we as infrastructure engineers build products that are easily operated on by product engineers. How can we as the Envoy maintainers and the Envoy community do that for the data plane itself? So an example of that is the extensions, divisions between core and extensions, where we have opened up the possibility for you to compile in whatever you need for your flavor of Envoy. Yeah.
I think one of the original parts of that question was really about the what binary images and things like that we might have. And I think if I just look left and right amongst the people that I see up here in the maintainers, most of us are not people who are using pre-built binary images. We're actually just building things from source with exactly the individual extensions that we need. So in many ways, the extensions is already the mechanism to get that level of flexibility to give you the lean binary that you want. And I think we should have a community conversation about what people want from pre-built binaries, because I think a lot of the people from Lyft and Google and probably Apple and so on are not operating with pre-built binaries. We're building things, when we deploy them. So that's a different thing, and I think we should understand what the community really wants from pre-built binaries.
Actually, that makes me wonder what the audience's practices are. How many people use pre-built binaries in their Envoy? And how many people build their own from source? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, and so while we're doing this survey, I'm kind of curious, who's working from head of master? Okay, And who's working from the last point release or 8-point release? Okay.
It looked from my perspective. Yeah. It looked from my perspective like slightly more were building from source at head than the other two categories, but it was kind of distributed.
But but yeah, I think on this topic, particularly around, I think someone asked me before, around like Docker images, around will we do point releases, like, you know, deal with cherry picking and stuff like that. It's not that any of us are opposed to any of these things. It's just that, like was just said, none of the companies that are maintainers, honestly, they don't use any of those things, so that's why it hasn't been a development priority. So I don't think anyone's opposed to any of that stuff. We just need help. So this is another area of, like, if you want to help with our Docker images or manage cherry pick point releases for stable branches or any of those things, please come talk to us. Let's maybe do one more question and then we can go outside. No, stretching. Go ahead. The question is Edge Proxy or API Gateway a first-class use case? I think absolutely yes. We see Envoy as a universal solution to all types of proxy, whether that be API Gateway, Edge, middle proxy, or service mesh client-side load balancing.
I'd say this is one of those cases where amongst the maintainers, all of those use cases are represented, unlike the case of using pre-built binaries. But that's a case where, like, we are doing all those things.
Also, depending on if you've seen like Matt's earlier talk, like that was also kind of the point of it too, is to be able to handle both functionalities equally, right? Because then you don't have to maintain two different proxies, and that's where then you have two set of networking teams and you have two set of application libraries, and so making it uniform across your entire stack.
And
Simplify. And the client makes everyone's life happier. And I can't see who's doing the happy developers, but then you actually have a lot happier developers because you only need to learn one thing versus n things.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming for successful EnvoyCon.